When correct thinking, rationality, and logic are out of the picture, you say, what have I done? That's why love is the exaggerated form of affection and compassion. And in our culture, the objectification of love in this way, its control over a person like this, is seen as exploitation, as a loss of purpose and aim. Hostile forces extinguish the life of existence, and conflict ends in death and decay on a universal scale. He says, the root of the tree of life in nature, whose wholeness has been shattered, is sin, its sprouting is disease, and its fruit is death. Whether we are talking about the love and affection between two people, such as a husband and wife, or about the relationships between people who live together in a society but each belong to different worlds, the point remains the same. The Quran highlights two words in this context. One,
Istanbul. Dear viewers, today we will talk about love, passion, and sorrow in the context of verse 67 of Surah az-Zukhruf. Our guest is Professor Dr. Şaban Ali Düzgün. Hello, Professor.
hello.
Professor, today we would like to discuss the concept of love from an ontological perspective in the context of verse 67 of Surah az-Zukhruf. Here, the verse mentions that even friends can become enemies. First of all, what kind of foundation does love have? How can someone who is loved turn into an enemy? What lies at the root of love? Could you talk about these things?
Well, of course, love is a word that everyone uses. It seems as if it is just an emotion that regulates relationships between people. But when we take it beyond just an emotion and consider it as a principle of existence, a principle within the structure of being, even as a principle that regulates God's will and power over creation, then the magnitude of the matter becomes apparent. Therefore, for this reason, I have an article called The Ontology of Love, which my viewers can find under the title The Abuse of Love, Excess in Love, and Cults. They can access it online and check it out for more details. Here, I would like to summarize that article. First of all, love possesses a reality beyond just an emotion. It has an existence and an ontology. This means that it also carries the risk of producing its opposite within itself. What is that? What is the opposite of love? What can a person who loves do when they are abandoned?
They can hate.
They can hate. Love can contain hatred within itself. That's why right at the beginning we mentioned the verse from Surah az-Zukhruf where the words mawadda and muhabba, both meaning love, are used in the Quran, except for those who are pious. Allah also has a name, Al-Wadud. It is one of his 99 names. Al-Wadud means the most loving. But something happens to a person who feels mawadda, who feels love, who even says, I am madly in love. And then the Quran says that they become enemies to one another. But there's a group that is excluded from this, those whom he calls the God conscious. Taqwa here. Taqwa is used in many different contexts in the Quran. So if you ask what taqwa means in the context of love here, it is the mechanism that protects both you and the person you once loved, so that when you lose someone or something you love, that love does not turn into hatred. And that hatred does not escalate into a law of sin, that is, it does not reach a peak or a maximum point that would drive you towards sin or crime in any way whatsoever. What is that mechanism? That mechanism is a mechanism of reason and balance, a mechanism of morality. Therefore, the boundaries of love should actually be seen within the limits of reason and morality, so that even as we love, we keep it within those boundaries we love, within those limits, within the boundaries of reason, within the boundaries of morality and by morality. I also mean that it encompasses justice and compassion. Such a balance must be established that even if you lose it, that balance can still preserve its existence. Otherwise, I'd like to read soon from a writer named Vladimir Solovyov about this law of sin. If there is selfishness, for example, when someone you love leaves you, that primitive instinctive urge to possess, that desire to claim them as property, as if to say, if you're not mine, then you belong to the grave, that urge to make someone your own, as if they were property in a word. And I want to emphasize this in quotation marks, is selfishness
There's actually a narcissistic attitude here. In that situation, the person thinks they own the one they love and believes that losing them is a great betrayal or injustice done to themselves.
That's exactly what they think. But what is this way of thinking? This way of thinking is selfishness. This way of thinking is narcissism. This way of thinking is fetishism. In other words, you think of that person as if you own them, like a fetish, like an object. And his loss shakes you. But all of this, ultimately, it's pure selfishness. And as I mentioned, Solovyov's so-called law of sin comes into play, and sin begets sin. In the end, with that selfishness, narcissism, and fetishism, you end up committing a great sin and crime. So who would expect that now? I mean, who would think that love for a person could also contain hatred and sin within it? But in The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, whom I love very much, he first establishes a contrast between joy and sorrow. Joy and sorrow. But then he says, they're not really that opposed to each other. He says, the deeper your joy truly is, the more sorrow it will indeed contain deep within it. The deeper your sorrow is, the more joy it will contain within it. He says, the deeper you go, the more power you gain to contain its opposite. Now, let's talk about love. What is the exaggerated form of love? It is passion. Therefore, there is no compassion in passion. There is no rationality in passion. Passion, knowingly, is actually a kind of loss of consciousness, because you don't think rationally. Why am I saying this? Because normally a person thinks about something and then does it. But that's not the case in passion. First you act, and then you start to think. This is the reversal of willpower, because maybe that's where its appeal lies. I mean, that's where its deceptiveness comes from. But then you say, what have I done? When you say, what have I done? It's in those moments when your willpower is out of the picture. When rational thinking, rationality, and logic are no longer in play, that's when you say, what have I done? That's why love is the exaggerated form of affection and compassion. And in our culture, the objectification of love in this way, its ability to take control of a person like this, is seen as a form of exploitation, a loss of purpose and direction. I would like to repeat this. The word love, and sometimes, depending on the context, we use it as a synonym for affection. Sometimes we use it as mawadda, derived from Allah's name, al-Wadud. Sometimes we use it in exchange for mercy. In Arabic, the spectrum is even broader. We don't have many words for this in Turkish. So we use the word love to cover all of these meanings. But when we examine its structure, this is something I find important. When God wills to create the universe and then uses his immense and boundless power in the act of creation, all of these stages, according to our esteemed scholars such as Al-Kindi and Ibn Miskawi, are always, without exception, accompanied by God's deep compassion, enduring love, and gentle affection. Therefore, let this be something we emulate in our horizontal relationships with other people. Let our well-meaning, any declaration of intent or orientation towards them also contain love, affection, and compassion. There are things over which we have power and ability. For example, we may have power directed towards someone weaker than ourselves. Let this love, this compassion accompany that power, just like God's. God has the power to subdue everything. He could, if he wished, destroy everything at once. But such a thing has never happened, and it never will. So you see, when it comes to things like power and might, look, what do they contain? Power and might. What do you add alongside it? You add compassion. Tuzur scholars say that this is present in the very essence of all existence. In fact, Kindi and Ibn Miskawi are the ones who have addressed this the most. In the East, what did you leaven it with? This is present in the essence of human beings as well. It is also present in the essence of all existence. It is even present in the very bond that defines God's relationship with beings. What is there? There is love, there is compassion, there is affection, there is fondness, they say. Perfect. But here was the risk. The verse tells us, I would like to mention another verse here as well. And it is this, it is related to the purpose. If you were to give them everything on earth, you still could not create affection or love between them. People. This is used in the sense of social unity, social harmony. Imagine a society where people hate each other, do not love one another, and are divided, becoming atomized. Now, God says, even if you were to give them all the worlds in a material sense, if you were to create all the riches for every day, still would not feel affection for one another. They would not love each other. On the contrary, competition would intensify even more, and man would continue to be a wolf to man. But we placed affection among them, and they realized that they were one, he says. What is the existence of this affection, this unity, in a social sense? This is called unity of purpose. In other words, if you create a purpose, this is also true for husband and wife. This love applies to husband and wife as well. Something needs to be assigned here that goes beyond just we love each other. The verses we read teach us something, whether we are talking about the love and affection between two people, between husband and wife, or about the relationships among people who live together in a society but each belong to different worlds. The Quran highlights two words here. First, taqwa. In other words, in every situation, the husband and wife should both observe and protect each other's rights. This is piety, protection. So there is no selfishness. It's not about me first, but rather a mutual protection. Second, we will assign a purpose to our togetherness.
Hajja, here you are talking about the bond of love both socially and individually. You also mentioned many concepts such as morality, willpower, and justice. Now, since we generally place love at the foundation of morality, we believe that in order to behave morally, we must have love and affection for the person we are treating morally. And we actually see most clearly in separations that when love ends, the very foundation of morality is shaken and collapses. In other words, rather than in parent-child relationships, we observe that when love ends between spouses, separation often leads to immoral and increasingly merciless behavior toward one another. So, in order to prevent this from happening, do we need to base morality on something other than love?
It definitely seems that way. That is, the relationship between people is one of compassion, one of affection. But these, well, as we said, these are not just emotions. We are talking about something beyond feelings, something that exists in the very nature and law of being. Therefore, we need to control these feelings. You control them. But beyond control, there is something else, something deeper and more fundamental. Every being is an independent entity in itself. So when couples separate, this love contains hatred within itself. As I said, it's interesting, just like with joy and sorrow. The deeper your love isn't, this is where the imbalance begins. As I said, it's a kind of protective mechanism. A mechanism that protects both love itself and those who love. What is that mechanism? Moral principles, the moral law operate there. The mechanism of the rational, reasonable person that establishes and maintains balance also operates there. This mechanism works both while you are together, living side by side. And when you separate, think of it this way. A person you love deeply, someone you say you would give your life for, a woman or a man. When you reach the stage of divorce and go to court, you can end up airing all their dirty laundry in front of everyone. You realize that this wasn't love at all. This is something fictitious. Here, this selfishness meaning, as long as they exist with you, you are attached to them. Like an object, it's like fetishism, in other words, and you are a narcissist. These are pathological states. This is what it means. If you assign a purpose to that relationship, why do people exist together? Not just for love, not just because they love each other. There are many more reasons for existing together. People can assign these themselves. I mean, why are we together? It could be for children. It could be to accomplish greater things together or for the sake of God. Who knows really? But when they separate, they need to be connected by a bond that won't break. In other words, there need to be bonds that are higher and different than just the connection between two people. This is what Kindi, Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ibn Miskawayhos, who delve deepest into psychology among our thinkers, talk about the inner world of a person, their inner structure. Kindi, for example, says, attach yourself to such things. While discussing how to eliminate the sorrows and griefs within a person, he says, attach yourself to such things that if they slip away from your hands, you won't experience great disappointment or sadness. And even if you do feel sad, for example, in the case of separation, when you feel sad, the Quran says this, the righteous people, that is, those who want to live life in a protected way, never carry the sorrow of the past on their shoulders. That's what it says. This is an incredible thing. You have to find a way. Either you will do it yourself or you will get support. But we broke up. Okay, did this make me feel sad? It did. What I need to know is this. The being who knows everything gives wisdom and guidance. A wise person never carries the sorrow of the past on their shoulders. Sorrow is not something to be carried. I won't be a porter for this. How am I going to forget this? This is what forgetting means. Remember, the greatest power and talent given to man is what God has given him. Amazing. You will forget. It's not just this or that. Binary logic doesn't work here. Multiple logic works. If it's not that one, it's another. That's really how the world is. I mean, because these are issues we all face and discuss. They come and we talk.
Yes.
Being abandoned, someone else being chosen. You see, that word love slowly starts to rot. Love decays, affection decays. And suddenly what we call the law of sin, right away, it has perfectly expressed where that selfishness will eventually take us.
I'm really curious too, Professor. So is the beginning of the law of sin the end of love?
That's exactly what he says. Since it says that the evolution of this into selfishness invites the law of sin, instead of summarizing Vladimir Solovyov's statement here, with your permission, I'd like to read it out.
Professor.
He says the following: life in the wild is wild if it is founded on selfishness and without love. Life is selfish. It is a bad life. Its law is a law of sin. According to the same law, sin carries its own retaliation within itself, and one evil calls forth another. If one being acts with hostility toward another, the others also act with hostility toward it. Such hostility is, in the truest sense of the word, suffering another form of worldly evil. Mutual. Since everything in nature sins against one another, everything begins to suffer because of each other. In the end, this selfishness that separates one being from the others turns every creature into a stranger living in a hostile environment that attacks it. The entire life of this being is spent struggling against this hostile environment, trying to protect itself against the whole world. Yet it cannot protect itself against all these forces because it is alone, while its enemies are many. This conflict between each being and the others ultimately leads to the destruction of every creature. The hostile forces extinguish the life of the being, and the conflict ends on a universal scale with death and decay. It is said that the root of the tree of life in nature, whose wholeness has been shattered, is sin. Its sprouting is disease, and its fruit is death. Perfect.
Superb.
Perfect. So now he explains to us how this selfish law, this narcissism, produces hatred, which is the opposite of love, and tells us about its risks. A person should put their head between their hands, reflect on this rationally, and make their decision.
That was a very beautiful quote, Professor. Thank you so much. You have really made it very clear that within a precious and important feeling like love, there can also exist a feeling like hatred, which is actually so bad and can lead to terrible things.
Let us please take every step with that awareness, knowing that risk.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, today we talked about love, passion, and sorrow. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.